talk first, and I'm very happy to be here today to tell you about the role of academia in our whole ecosystem here. When I came to this meeting last year, there was not a discussion about academic partnerships, and it's great that it's been added to the program. So we can go to the slides. So as things have changed in the pharmaceutical industry, things have also changed in academia, and it's been guided in large part by the changes that have happened on the pharma side first. So I'm going to talk about broadly pharma in general, and that'll also get us to the rare disease component here. But in the past, pharma had done all stages and all aspects of drug development, and that changed over time to start welcoming in input from outside, and that would be partnerships with CROs, manufacturers, other companies, and also academia. And as that process changed, another thing was changing on the academic side. So whereas academia, and I'm talking, when I say academia, I'm referring specifically to academic research hospitals. In this case, it could be also universities, but since I'm coming from an academic research hospital, I'm really thinking about from that perspective. And historically, these institutions treated patients. This is where the thought leaders were and are, and the patients are treated there. So there's a deep knowledge about patient condition, long-term relationships with patients, and then there's also the research end of it. So major breakthrough discoveries on the basic research side, development of animal models and tools. And in the middle there's the clinical development, which takes place generally in the past industry-sponsored, but would take place also at the academic center. And what's changed over time, I think, as all of these parties have shifted their roles a little bit, is now academia is much more involved earlier on in drug development. And there are several ways that this is happening, especially in this phase here. And there are a number of programs that are out there which we're very excited to see, helping to support academic partnerships with companies in this area. So for example, the NCATS program and TREND, specifically for rare diseases, really focuses on early stage drug development and partnering academic programs with industry. Similarly, pharma itself has also many interesting new programs for supporting academic partnerships, and the one that I'll mention here is the Pfizer CTI program, which we heard a little bit about this morning. But many companies now have a wide variety of programs for partnering, and this is collaboration, not necessarily the pure licensing that took place over the many years since the Bayh-Dole Act was passed. Most importantly, I think, for today's talk is the role of patient advocacy groups and the foundations, which really were the first catalysts for this partnership, which back when both parties were sort of doing their separate thing, the patient advocacy groups were the ones that really brought them together. And that's why I'm very optimistic about the partnership possibilities in this evolving landscape, particularly in rare diseases, because I think people in the rare disease community are already driven by a similar mission, and that aligns them up front, which makes things easier, and it allows us to do some creative things in the rare disease areas, which can then translate over into broader disease areas too. And other things that have happened is academic institutions themselves have started their own programs, and you'll hear about one at the University of Minnesota next, which is very exciting. Children's also has its own technology development funds that helps us push inventions developed at Children's through to a licensable stage. We're not going to talk about that today, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about that. So really, things have moved from a unidirectional transfer of knowledge and information from the academic medical center out to commercial entities, where foundations, advocacy groups, and the government really sponsored research within academia and didn't have much relationship with industry. And now, in the current landscape, there's just a much more enmeshing of goals and working together. So what does this mean for academia? What does it mean for patients? And why is rare diseases, why in rare disease? Why is this so good of an area to work these partnerships out? So now I have to give you a little background on where I'm coming from. So I'm coming from Children's Hospital in Boston. You may know of it from its clinical reputation, but we also happen to have a very large research base, which is very exciting for us because it gives us the ability to take knowledge that's gained in the clinic and actually bring it back to the lab and fill this translational cycle. So I'm going to give you one example of how the infrastructure within children's has been an infrastructure that we've built over many years, has been an asset as far as how we can partner with all of you. So our neuromuscular clinic, just one of the 225 clinics that we have, is a very long-standing clinic, has seen many patients and done natural history studies over many decades. The clinical team, this is just a subset, is diverse, so there's a multidisciplinary team because this is a multi-organ kind of condition and complex. And then on the research side, we have a very strong research team as well. So Dr. Kunkel initially identified the dystrophin gene in 1987. He's at Children's and he has spent that time since trying to figure out ways from the basic research perspective of moving therapeutics forward. And he has a large team, and we have several other team labs that are related. So if you think about the combination of these people in and of themselves, there's a lot that they can do. But if we add to that the capabilities of, let's say, a big pharma company like Pfizer, which is the partnership that we have with Pfizer is around muscular dystrophy, then really the possibilities become quite much more efficient. So this was an interesting partnership that we set up based on early screening done by Dr. Kunkel. And once he had identified some molecules, from there, for us, that's all we can do in a way. We don't have chemists, we don't have medicinal chemistry, we don't have, we have the ability to go into preclinical models, but we wouldn't want to do that unless we had a real molecule that we knew was the right molecule. So working with a company enabled the whole program to move forward. Another one to mention is on the autism side. Autism is many things, and it's a spectrum, and so we have the clinical experts evaluating patients. And then on the genetics and genomics side, we have genomics and genetics experts looking at genetic data. And the interesting partnership that we have here around autism right now, and it's one of several, but just wanted to highlight one with another big pharma company, is around developing iPS cell lines from patients at Children's. And this is a partnership actually with several other institutions around town, Harvard Stem Cell Institute, MGH, Harvard Medical School. So the combination, again, there of all of those resources together will allow all of the parties to benefit, and it will give some new platforms that all of us can use together for drug development. So I mentioned that there are 225 specialty clinics, and each one of these you could really look at and say, wow, there's a lot of possibility taking, if you combine, the expertise on the research and medical clinical side. So I'm just flashing a couple up here. So, and then from there are more cardiac immunodeficiencies, hematological disorders, and the list goes on. We're very proactive about partnering with industry. So my role in our office, I'm in the Technology and Innovation Development Office, which is the licensing office at the hospital. But my role is specifically for facilitating partnerships that will either develop our technologies or help move technologies towards clinic. And because we feel so strongly about rare diseases and the deep and broad expertise at Children's, we've been hosting a symposium in the fall, and I just wanted to mention that because I would be delighted to invite all of you to that. We're doing it again this fall. It's very scientific in focus. We have about 15 children's investigators who give short talks about their work and their resources, and we invite all of you to join us there to talk about different opportunities where you might have a need. So the main takeaway message that I have is to think about academia as more than a research lab or your thought leader. It's the place where all of that stuff actually comes together, and that represents an opportunity for all of us. It would be great to have more partnerships with patient advocacy groups, for example. with or without industry partners. But there's a lot that can come out of these kind of partnerships, including drug repurposing, testing in animal models that are established, developing new models, doing collaborative screening, new cell lines, the natural history studies which can take place within academia. We talked about that earlier today. Having that industry input earlier on would be great for the studies themselves. And the main point is that going from discovery to first in human becomes a possibility to do together with a company. So how do we structure these to make the most out of the joint assets that are being created and with the aspects that both parties are bringing? So historically, it's been done through sponsored research agreements around a single project or licensing. These are negotiated sort of on a per project basis, where I think to really make it productive, these need to be structured in a much more long-term sort of way. So the vision is we need to get something to first-in-human trials or beyond. We're doing this for the sake of patients. We're aligning our missions to meet the patient need. Therefore, we need to plan ahead so that we can design things right now that will actually get us there. We don't want to short fund it. We don't want to have less commitment than is necessary. These can be narrow in terms of a disease area, or you could put them across the entire institution. The Pfizer CTI program actually is an open RFP to the entire institution. It's for developing biologic therapeutics. So that's how broad it is. And Pfizer's bringing a lot of resources to those projects. Key aspects, of course, ownership. Control of decision-making is a critical one. Who gets a voice in making decisions? How are resources allocated? In the successful partnerships, there's joint decision-making. 50-50 decision-making is really what it needs to be. Both parties need to collaborate to define the commitment levels. How long is this partnership going to last? How much dollar or other resource is each party going to bring? How are we going to ensure that this program that we're spending so much effort on is actually going to make it through strategic reviews within the company? What happens if it doesn't? And how do we make sure that we structure the confidentiality terms confidentiality and publication terms that make sense for both parties? You want to be able to have an established relationship based on trust, and also be able to share knowledge without hindering the necessities of academia as well. So best case scenario is these things are jointly shared, and there's as much 50-50 contribution as you can possibly design. And the length of term and the commitment really can be the starting point on which the rest is based. And that's it. Thank you.
You've already heard that times are changing, and there are reasons for this. There are forces in play in the industry that result in at least large pharma looking at late-stage acquisitions. This creates an opportunity for small companies and academic institutions to get involved in early-stage drug development and discovery. Further, there is increasing interest in the development of specialty products, where there's an opportunity to streamline development and premium price the product itself. At the same time, there are phenomenal and formidable forces within academic institutions which are causing them to intensify their efforts to commercialize discoveries, especially in the biomedical sciences. It wouldn't surprise anyone if I told you that the primary driver is revenue. For these reasons, several, perhaps many universities, research-intensive universities, are redesigning the way in which they carry out research, particularly in the area of discovery and development. And at the University of Minnesota, we started this process a few years ago, and by 2010, we had redesigned our process, and I'm displaying this on the screen. So you can see that work such as early discovery, where we and other universities have always been leaders, has progressed to the ability to do high throughput screening and lead compound identification, optimization, even preclinical development, and then on to phase 1 through phase 4 research. And the redesign means that we now have layered onto that process appropriate centers with facilities and procedures and systems to facilitate the development of drugs to a point where they can be commercialized. You'll note here that part of this process involves the Center for Orphan Drug Research, and I'll say more about that in just a second. And as Nurjana has already said, you can see now that there are expanding research facilities and capabilities at academic institutions specifically intended to facilitate drug discovery and development. Universities often have proximity to faculty experts in rare disorders. Many universities have specialized clinical centers for rare disorders. And participation by university groups in preclinical and clinical research consortia that are particularly relevant to rare disorders and orphan drug development is an ever-growing phenomenon. So you can see that universities are uniquely positioned to participate in rare disease research and orphan drug development. Now, these phenomena, these forces, have resulted in the emergence of what I call centers of excellence across the United States, with these centers focused on some aspect of rare disease research and drug development. And the centers will vary in their model to some degree. And as I've displayed here, you can see that some universities are primarily disease-focused. They're interested in understanding the biology of a rare disorder. Others are very interested in discovery and focus their resources in that domain. Some groups, including the Center for Orphan Drug Research at the University of Minnesota, are development-focused. And there are others where the center plays a role in supplementing or complementing industry-driven activities. And suffice it to say that there are hybrids of each of these models in which one or more groups will have functions in several domains. Now, what's important to understand is that this has been enabled by the creation of research support entities that include those which the universities are creating or academic hospitals, where there's an infrastructure effort underway. But there are also government-funded mechanisms which are creating support for orphan drug development. And some of these include the program out of Steve Groff's office, the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, which is a series of 19 consortia focused on one or more rare disorders. Other consortia, such as pharmacogenomics, lend themselves to identifying potential targets and methods of treating these rare conditions. So combine the emergence of these university-based centers, supported either internally or by outside extramural funding and resources, now make it possible for academic centers to conduct orphan drug development in a way that was not possible even 10 years ago. One example, one model, is the one that we've developed at the University of Minnesota. It's called the Center for Orphan Drug Research. We established it in 2005 thanks to a gift to our College of Pharmacy. And we have three functions: research to develop new therapies for those afflicted with a rare disorder. At a university, of course, education is important, and we focus on that. And we also serve as an advocacy role, and you'll see that takes place in a number of ways, including public presentations and support for things such as the FDA workshops on orphan drug designation applications. Our focus at the University of Minnesota is on rare pediatric neurological disorders, and with time, what we've come to realize that our special niche is in conducting research for drugs already available, but where they may have an important use in a rare disorder. In other words, repurposing. Now, our capabilities are pretty substantial given our small size. We have an array of expertise in clinical pharmacology and the related disciplines, and we carry out clinical research from phase 1 to phase 4. We also have capabilities of doing cellular and in vitro studies in basic and translational pharmacology. We have a very strong bioanalytical laboratory. But as importantly, we're able to leverage the facilities and expertise across a land-grant institution that has more than 60,000 students and a biomedical faculty numbering 2,000. So we collaborate with medicine, vet med, the Department of Biomedical Engineering, and the like. We're also fortunate to have a clinical and translational science award that's funded in an institute, that's CTSI, that provides infrastructure for the conduct of clinical studies. Now, just to give you a flavor for the kinds of projects we have underway and where the partnerships lie with those projects, I've listed just a few. And one is the development of intranasal benzodiazepines for seizure emergencies. Seizure emergencies, something called acute repetitive seizures, is recognized by FDA as a rare condition. And currently, the treatment of choice is rectal diazepam. Now, it probably will surprise you to learn that many people prefer not to get rectal diazepam. And so some years ago, we began a series of studies to examine whether or not an alternate method is possible to provide this treatment for people who want relief from severe, crippling, repetitive seizures, but object to the route of administration. And that's been funded by a variety of patient advocacy organizations and the industry. We're also doing some work in a canine model of epilepsy, and I'll come back to that in just a second, in which a device company is attempting to predict seizures, not detect, predict seizures, and then bring in pharmacology to prevent the seizure from occurring in the first place. It's a very exciting opportunity, and that's been funded by industry and government. We also have a project looking at a treatment for late-stage adrenal leukodystrophy, and I'll discuss that in a second. And lastly, we've taken a project on to see if we can develop an alternative to other therapies to treat baclofen withdrawal when the baclofen intrathecal pump fails in children and adults with spasticity. This withdrawal syndrome can be fatal, and currently there is no effective treatment, but the number of individuals experiencing this kind of withdrawal condition is probably under 5,000 in any given year. Now, just as an example of how we go through this process, we took an old drug, two old drugs, diazepam and midazolam is listed here, and we made some formulations. This was sort of in the back of the lab approach, just to see if we could attain any kind of reasonable drug concentrations with either formulation. And we were able to do so. This is a concentration time curve that shows a comparison of diazepam and midazolam given nasally to healthy volunteers. And we found that it was at least feasible, but the formulations were not optimal. So we asked ourselves, what's the next step? So we decided to go back a step and using a canine model. And let me just spend a moment here. When you think of laboratory models, you think of some artificial creation that tries to mimic the actual condition, the actual clinical condition. What's interesting here is these dogs have clinical epilepsy. They develop it over time. You probably know of, maybe have neighbors who have dogs with seizures. We use these dogs because, as far as we can tell, the condition is identical to human epilepsy, and the responses we get in these animals makes prediction of response in humans a much greater probability. And going forward, this work is being funded in partnership with groups such as NIH, Pharma, and device companies. Now, lastly, some years back, the hematology oncology group that does hematopoietic stem cell transplantation at the university, and we're one of the leaders in that area, came to us and said, we're giving truckloads of this drug called N-acetylcysteine to our boys with this condition, adrenal leukodystrophy, and we're not sure what we're doing. Can you help? And so our group said, this fits very definitely our mission. Adrenal leukodystrophy, or ALD, is a rare genetic disorder. It affects boys, and the prevalence is 1 in 20,000. If the disease progresses to late stage, and about 35% of the time, if a boy is afflicted with ALD, it goes on into late stage. Thereafter, death is virtually certain in 3 to 5 years. Up until the year 2000, there were no treatments for late stage ALD. The group at our institution began doing stem cell transplants in the early 2000s. And what I've got here for you is a survival curve showing what happened with the initiation of stem cell transplant in these boys with ALD. And by the way, if you don't know what ALD is, there's a movie called Lorenzo's Oil. And in Lorenzo's Oil, the condition the parents were trying to treat was ALD. The success rate was dismal with just doing stem cell transplantation. An investigator at Hopkins said, try an antioxidant to see if that will suppress the rejection and improve the uptake of the stem cells to enhance survival. And look at the result. Survival rates double. So our group is now conducting a series of both preclinical and clinical studies to understand why it works, what's the optimal dose, when to start and when to stop. The problem here is this product is an IV formulation. It's actually an orphan drug used to treat Tylenol overdose. That market exclusivity is due to expire, and there will be a generic product available, probably more, within a year or two. We cannot figure out a way to commercialize this IV N-acetylcysteine for use in ALD. But then we concluded that's not necessarily our mission. At the university, our mission may well be to do rigorous research to understand the pharmacology, the safety, and the efficacy of this treatment, to publish it in peer-reviewed journals, and then to inform clinicians so that they may use this in a safe and effective manner. And that's exactly the process we're pursuing. Lastly, we have an education mission, and for this group, most significantly, in collaboration with the group running the Lysosomal Disease Network at our university, we're training pharmacists, PharmD students who've graduated, to understand how to manage high-cost, potentially toxic therapies, most of these are biologics, and to also conduct clinical research. And this is a partnership with Genzyme, and I know there are people here from that company, and I thank them. And our first graduate's due to leave the program this summer, and we're hopeful that this will continue. We think it's a useful program to prepare individuals to improve care and use these drugs safely and effectively. We have other programs, including those for other postdoc fellows and graduate students. In summary, you've heard that the pharmaceutical industry is reorganizing. NIH, as you've heard, is committed to supporting translational research and drug development to treat rare conditions. You've learned that the FDA is now looking at ways to accelerate the process. And academic centers are now in a position to take on a greater role in this endeavor. But what's the future hold? Well, this cartoon has that seeing eye that can prognosticate into the future. I don't have one of those, but I do have some quotes. One of the world's greatest nuclear physicists opined that prediction is very difficult, particularly if you're talking about the future. And I thought that made a lot of sense, but this was just too intellectual for me, so I reverted to my favorite philosopher, Yogi Berra. The future ain't what it used to be, so true, and if you get to a fork in the road, take one of them. Thank you very much.